reason to hurry. I don't know where you're running to. You know you don't need to worry. The world is turning to come to you. There's no reason to hurry. I don't know where you're running to. You know you don't need to worry. The world is turning to come to you. You try to find that perfect line before it's out of sight. It's chasing lights, that fireflies that flicker through the night. You say you've got to reach the top, and so you play the game. You make the rules, you win and lose, and then good morning, good evening, good night, everyone. At whatever time scale you're listening to, I hope that I'm audible. Welcome to this conversation. There are, I think, already 37 people here. Welcome, everyone. Today we'll be discussing neuroscience of grief. And right off the bat, I want to give a trigger warning that we will be covering topics which are sensitive, and we'll be talking about death, we'll be talking about mental health, and I just want everyone to know that these are the topics that we'll be talking about, and we will try to address them in as sensitive a way as possible. I hope that you're all feeling well. Lavina, welcome. Vidhi, Krish, Sarthak, SK Gaming, all of you, welcome to the conversation. So, without any further ado, let's start the discussion. When we talk of grief, a lot of things come to our mind. We think about sadness, we think about loss, we think about all the basic emotions. It is a very complex topic. It is actually much more complex than just sadness or just fear. So, sadness, fear, these are considered as more basic emotions. But grief is more complex than that. It is a combination of cognitive, emotional, psychological state. And the thing is that before I go on, can you just confirm that everything is okay, that I'm audible? Increase the volume, okay? I'm just going to wait for a minute. I just need a confirmation that everything is audible, everything is okay. Hello, yes, okay. Everything seems all right. Wait, hang on. I'm just going to switch the fan. Audible now, perfect. Everything is okay. All right, so then let's begin the discussion. We have all felt grief. We've all felt some kind of grief. We have all felt sadness. We feel sadness when something goes away. And one of the things that we quickly learn in life is that everything goes away. So when you go on a vacation, that vacation ends. When you buy a new car, that car eventually gets spoiled. You have to sell it. If you are on a winning streak, that winning streak ends, and people die. And these are realizations that we come across, all of us at different stages in different ways. And we are not really taught how to deal with loss. We are not taught how to deal with things ending. We are only taught how to plan to get things. We are only taught how to aim for growth. We are not really taught how to deal with the inevitable decline of things. And that is one of the things that we will be talking about today, that grief stems out of loss. So when we are discussing grief, let me connect the So guys, you can ask me questions in the chat. I will be taking them as and when it is appropriate, and whenever there is a relevant comment, I will be taking it. There's a super chat, I'll be taking it. Otherwise, we will be taking questions in the end. Uh, when we talk of grief, what we are basically discussing is loss. Every time you lose something, such as your mobile phone or a car or your favorite pen, you get a sense of sadness, you get a sense of loss. And the idea is that all of that loss is accompanied by a sense of hope. You have this sense of hope that you can recover it, or you can get a new one, you can get a new mobile phone, you can get a new car. Whatever is the thing that you have lost, eventually your brain comes to terms with the fact that this will pass, this can be recovered from. The idea of grief is that usually grief comes when we have to deal with a sense of loss of a person, and therein is the problem, therein is the difference, that here we cannot have hope that that person can be recovered. And the idea is that this is something that is permanent. So the concept of permanence, or the concept of permanent loss, is something that has bothered humanity, that has disturbed humanity since the beginning of time. Hang on. Shamli saying audio is clipped. Please fix. Can you all confirm if that is a problem? I've used a separate filter for the audio today, so I'm hoping that that actually makes it better. Can my moderators please confirm if the audio is good? All good. Lag. All right. Okay. All right. I've removed all the filters. I think this should be okay now. No problem. All right. Great. The idea of permanent loss. Now, right from the beginning, right from hunter-gatherer times, people have been dying. And if you've seen the movie Man from Earth, it is there on YouTube. I would highly recommend everybody go check it out. But in that, I won't give you spoilers, but he describes what the primitive man would have thought about death. That there are a bunch of people walking along. They are migrating from one plane to another, and people just drop down and die. And so, how do you deal with it? How do you make sense of it? You may think that a spirit has possessed them. You may think that somebody has taken their life away. You may suspect each other that, did you take his life away? Why did this person stop moving? The idea that something can permanently go has always been a cognitive riddle. Our brain could never fully conceive that how can something just go away? It was here right this second. How can something just disappear? And almost every spiritual thought, and much later, every religion, and even later every philosophy has been trying to deal with the idea of loss, has been trying to deal with the idea of death. So if you look at all the religions, so whether it is Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam or Christianity, Jewish religion, all religions have been so fundamentally based on the idea of death and the purpose of life and the idea of what is going to happen after death. So death is a very important concept in all religions. Same for philosophy, same for all Western philosophies. If you look at Stoicism or nihilism or even existentialism, the idea of existentialism is dealing with personal mortality. The idea that Nothing is forever. Everything is transient. Everything is non-permanent. And this has been going on for so long that you can understand why. There is no bigger problem. Nothing is more important for human beings than understanding why we die, and conversely, why we live. So there's a very tempting or very relevant thought exercise that if you don't die, what purpose would life have then? Because all our sense of purpose is ultimately stemming from the fact that we die. But that is for a different discussion. Today, let's talk about grief. When someone dies, what happens? There are many words that deal with this issue. So first of all, we have to sort of unentangle those words. So one is bereavement. Bereavement is the sense of loss. When you lose somebody, that is bereavement. When somebody dies, after bereavement comes grief. And grief is the series of psychological, biological states that your brain goes through in order to come to terms with the bereavement. You have lost somebody, you've lost something, and you need to come to terms with it. And finally comes mourning. Mourning is the sense of recovery. Mourning is what happens when you recover from grief and get back into your original state, or get back into society, get back into your life. That is mourning. So these three things are what happens every time there is a significant personal loss. Now, imagine for a second what happens in loss. Imagine either having lost somebody or losing someone that you care about, that you love, without letting it overwhelm you, without letting it take over you completely. Imagine or remember what happened when you lost someone, and think of all the emotions that you went through. The sense of sadness, the sense of anger, that sense of guilt, or imagine all the memories that it triggers. When you remember the moments shared, the conversations that happened, the trips taken, think of the changes on your body. What all happens in your body when you go through that moment, and all the sense of desire and longing. The reason that I'm saying this is because grief is a complicated concept. Grief is not as straightforward as I am sad. It is a combination of so many different things. And what we are trying to do, why are we discussing this? Why are we here? Why are we discussing this is because we want to analyze each one of these things, right? We want to analyze our emotion, we want to analyze our memory, the changes that happen in our body, and what we wish to do. And all of this comes together as grief. There is also a sense of anticipatory grief. Sometimes you know that this is going to happen and I will be feeling all of this. And that doesn't really change it. Sometimes that increases that grief, sometimes it decreases it, but even then it is there. There were a couple of messages in the chat, and people had asked me separately as well, what is the difference between sadness, depression, and grief? So this is actually a very important concept. So I'm going to take a minute and address this. The difference between sadness, depression, and grief. Now, sadness is a mood, right? So when you're feeling sad, when you're feeling happy, when you're feeling angry, when you're feeling afraid, all of these are moods. So sadness is a common thing in both depression and in grief. So that is one of the common things in depression and grief. So when you say I feel depressed, or when you say I'm grieving, these are two separate things, but the common thing is that you are sad in both. And the other common thing is that both of these things cause disruption in your life. You are now not able to function in your day-to-day activities because you are either depressed or you are grieving. But this is where the similarities end, because depression and grief are actually two very, very different things. The most important point is that depression is pathological and grief is not. So depression is a mental health disorder that needs treatment, and grief is not a mental health disorder. It is a non-pathological response because you have lost somebody who has been important to you, and now because that person is no longer there, that source of joy, that source of happiness has been taken away from your world, and now you're feeling that sense of loss. And this is a natural response, and the treatment for grief is not a treatment per se, it is just reassurance and comfort. It is a normal response. Somebody who is grieving still has capacity for pleasure. They can still smile, they can still see the positive things in life. They are still grateful for a lot of things. They are still grateful that they have their family members around them. They are grateful that there are still things they can appreciate. They can still empathize with each other. They still have a positive self-image. Just because they are grieving does not mean that they think less of themselves. They may be sad at the world, that they don't know what to do in the world, but they still have a positive self-image. The difference in depression is that in depression, it is not that somebody is just taken away and there is no light in the world. There is no light at all. They have lost their sense of pleasure, and there is very little capacity to see positive things. Everything will appear negative, which is why depression requires treatment. Right? So this is a very important difference, and you are actually doing an injustice to both depression and to grief if you are mixing the two. Right? So, and of course it is because we are not taught this, because we don't have these conversations in our mind, we can get all of this mixed up, but it is so important because it is universal. I sincerely believe that grief is universal. Everybody goes through grief at some point. If you have loved, you will feel grief because something will be taken away. And depression is not that. Not everybody gets depressed. So it has to be taken in a different sense. Okay. One important point that I need to make is that just because they are different doesn't mean that one cannot become the other, and grief can turn into depression if it lasts longer. We will cover this later. We will cover this when we talk of recovering from grief, but important to remember that grief can turn into depression, and it's very important that we make sure it does not happen like that. Now, let's go a little scientific. We've talked a lot about emotions and state of mind. Let's talk scientific. What happens? There are events in your life, right? Things are always happening. Something or the other is going on. You buy something, you sell something, you meet somebody, you lose somebody. All those events are triggering certain responses in your brain. Now, all these events are constantly happening and they are triggering responses in your brain. So your brain has to respond to every event. But this response is in the form of either a feeling or an emotion, and we perceive it as a state of mind. So the whole purpose of this channel, the whole purpose of these discussions is to find out the correlation between this, what we feel, what we go through, why we behave the way we behave, and we want to correlate it with what happens in the brain. Because it is, in a way, it is sort of like a first principle approach. If you've heard of the first principle approach, it is, you go down to the absolute basics, you go down to the neural networks, you go down to the physics level, and then you work your way up. So if you are depressed, what is happening in the brain? If you are grieving, what is happening in the brain? And for me, neuroscience is a first principle approach for human behavior. Now, to those of you who are new and who have joined this discussion for the first time, welcome. This is a neuroscience channel, mainly and predominantly. So we are going to talk about the brain and the neural networks within the brain. The reason that it is complex is because the brain has more than 1 billion neurons and more than 1 quadrillion synapses. And all these neurons are constantly talking to each other to create the reality that we have. How does the brain deal with loss? So for that, you have to know a little bit about the brain. The brain has 4 lobes. So whoever has heard of this before, you can just join in the discussion and you can revise. The 4 lobes of the brain are the 4 arbitrarily divided parts of the brain, and the front of the brain is called as the frontal lobe, and this is where you think, you're logical, you're calculating, your personality, all of that. The part behind the frontal lobe is called as the parietal. Parietal. This is the part of the brain that deals with your environment and your inner state. So where your hands are, where your legs are, what is happening around you, all of that is in the parietal. Right behind the parietal is, the pink part is the occipital. This is where we see. All the things that we see, vision, is entirely in the occipital. And finally, you have the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is where your emotions are. And for today's discussion, we will be talking about the temporal lobe a lot, because within the temporal lobe, there are 2 areas. Whoever's attended it is familiar. One is called as the hippocampus and the other is called as the limbic system. Limbic system, everything to do with emotions. And hippocampus, everything to do with memory. Right? Now you have an outline. Now you know roughly what is what. When you sense something, when you are traveling through the world and when you're traveling through life, all these different areas are constantly talking to each other to help you navigate through this world better. Now let's go back to grief. When you lose someone, what do you think is happening in your brain? How will these parts of the brain try to help you deal with grief better? Or before dealing with it, how do you think that the brain will even react to grief? Let's see. If there is a loss, if you lose something or if you lose someone, the first thing that happens is that this piece of information, that you have lost somebody that you love, that you have lost somebody that has been in your life for a very, very long time, this piece of information has to be first understood. And this piece of information has to be accepted into your existing reality. Now, it's like fitting jigsaw pieces. If you have an existing reality and all the pieces are placed in a particular way, and if you are going to say that there is a piece which is shaped like this, and you have to fit it in this, your existing reality is not designed to exist this piece, to accept this piece of information. This is going to be a threat. We will talk about that a little later. This piece of information you can get either through a word or you can get it through a picture. Now, every time that you see that person's photograph or you hear that person's name, your brain gets triggered. Every time you get that information, your brain gets triggered. And this sense of threat that something you love has been taken away or it is no longer there, this activates a part of the limbic system called as amygdala. Every time. And like SCK Gaming said, amygdala is activated, and this is one of the first things that happen when you are triggered by loss. One of the first things that happen is your amygdala gets triggered, and within the amygdala, now we have not gone deeper into the amygdala, but say if this is the amygdala and you divide the amygdala in two, the upper part of the amygdala and the lower part of the amygdala actually have slightly separate roles. So the upper part of the amygdala gets triggered by this information. So the information is coming from above and it is coming down to the amygdala, and so the upper part of the amygdala gets triggered by this, and so the response from the lower part of the amygdala is called as avoidance. You can also call it the flight response. And this is what happens in denial. Now, right here, I need to mention that the 5 stages of grief has been very, very popular, and almost everybody has heard about it. We will be talking about the 5 stages of grief a little later, but right now I want to tell you that it is not accepted any longer. It has been an outdated theory. It made a lot of sense at that time, but now it is no longer accepted. But this initial bit, the denial bit, can be explained through amygdala activation. Now, the most important part of the brain that I want to tell you now is something called as the cingulate cortex. And I think I've mentioned this a couple of times, but the cingulate cortex is, for me, one of the most interesting parts of the brain, because it actually lies between the old brain and the new brain. So somebody mentioned lizard brain. I didn't see who, but if you imagine, now forget about the lobes, if you imagine the new brain, the evolved brain to lie here, and if you imagine the old brain, the primitive brain to lie here, then the cingulate cortex is the part of the brain that is doing the communication between the old and the new. So every time there is a sense of conflict, the cingulate cortex is the one that has to deal with it, because if the new brain wants one thing and the old brain wants another thing, the cingulate cortex is the one that has to act as a mediator कि तुझे क्या चाहिए, इसको क्या चाहिए, अच्छा ठीक है, let me figure out a common ground, right? In emotional states, especially in sadness, it has been found that the back part, the पीछे वाला part of the cingulate cortex, called as the posterior cingulate cortex. So cingulate cortex has an anterior part and a posterior part. So the posterior part of the cingulate cortex has everything to do with getting triggered by a memory. So when you see somebody's photograph or when you hear somebody's name that has that you have experienced loss of, the posterior cingulate cortex gets activated, and the posterior cingulate cortex talks to all the neighboring areas. So what are the neighboring areas here? One important area here is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus, if you remember, has all your memories, which is why as soon as you hear somebody's name, somebody that you've lost, your brain is immediately flooded with all the memories. What else is close by? Here you have the limbic system, which is why, again, as soon as you hear that person's name or see their photograph, all those old emotions come flooding back. The cingulate cortex is very closely connected to the anterior cingulate cortex, and from there to your prefrontal cortex, your PFC. Now here, this is your cognitive state. This is where you are logically thinking about it, but because your emotions can be too strong, you will not be able to think like you normally do, which is why when you're triggered by grief, you are not you. You are not your usual personality. You are not your usual calculating self. It is like trying to drive through fog. There is a constant interruption of emotions, of memories. It is a continuous ongoing process. Now, one interesting thing that I want to mention is this area just behind the prefrontal cortex called as insula. Now, insula is a very important part of the brain because your insula is the part of the brain that is aware of itself. It's aware of your own body. And this is the part of the brain that makes you feel that you are okay or you are not. Are you sick or are you healthy? This is the insula's job. And there have been studies that show that if you show somebody a photograph of somebody they have lost, there is an activation of this part of the insula. Your insula gets constantly activated, and that is to the brain, it is like a lighthouse signal showing that you are not well. And so the insula processing, the insula activation is a way of your brain telling itself that now I'm not feeling well, now I can't really work. And so this goes into that loop. PFC over limbic has just mentioned cortisol, and you may be familiar with all of these names from the talk that I did on depression. And this is why it is so important to understand the differences between grief and depression, because all of the things that I'm saying now is in acute grief. So when there is loss, there is acute grief. So grief that is overwhelming at that time. And if this continues, if this goes on, if there is no healing, then eventually you get something called as complicated grief. And this is where things start to look a lot like depression. And it can go into depression. And this is why it's important to know that the same brain areas are working, but healing is so important. Healing from grief is so important because we have to avoid depression. And it is not easy because almost 30 to 40% of people go through a stage where they are at risk of depression and then they recover, and 10% of people do end up in depression. So it is an important point to remember. And suppose it does go into depression, then everything changes. The treatment changes, the way you approach it changes. Why does grief happen? The predominant theory today, the neuropsychological theory, is something called as attachment theory. And this is by someone called John Bowlby. And the attachment theory basically says that all animals have evolved to attach themselves to someone who is going to protect them, who is going to look after them. And there is a core drive, there is a core fundamental drive to be close to that person, to remain with that person, because that person is going to protect you, that person is going to help you. They are going to make your life better in some way. And it is designed to discourage separation. So if there's a mother elephant and a baby elephant, that baby elephant's brain is going to discourage it from going away from the mother, and the mother's brain is going to discourage it from going away from the baby. So this is attachment theory, and the part of the brain that is very involved in this attachment theory is a part called as caudate. And caudate is a part of a bigger structure called as basal ganglia, which is one of the most fascinating parts of the brain because it's like a cycle. And with the basal ganglia, you can think of it as this circular engine in the center of the brain that is keeping everything running. So all around the basal ganglia, the rest of the lobes are doing their thing, and in the center of the brain is this loop that is constantly going on and on and on, and everything you do has to go through the basal ganglia. Everything you think has to go through the basal ganglia. Every action you take has to go through the basal ganglia. So it is one of the most important parts of the brain. And within the basal ganglia, the head of the basal ganglia, you can think of it, is the caudate. So the caudate is in charge of the basal ganglia. So the caudate is involved in attachment theory. So when you are close to someone that you love, the caudate will reward you, and when you go away from them, simplistically speaking, caudate will punish you. And so the loss of someone you love acts as a huge threat, and caudate is directly talking to amygdala. And this is also why, even without actual loss, even without actually losing somebody, even talking about mortality, even talking about death, even talking about the possibility of someone dying, yourself dying, obviously it is going to be disturbing, but even the people that you love, even the idea of that, even imagining that, or even dreaming about it, sometimes you have nightmares of someone you know dying, even that makes you very, very uncomfortable. And if even thinking about it or imagining it makes you so uncomfortable, then when it actually happens in actual grief, there are so many tidal waves of emotion that it is very difficult to process anything, and it is easier to just switch off. Now, let's talk about recovery. Let's talk about what happens afterwards, after loss has happened and grief has happened. What happens next? And this is when we talk of mourning. And this is one of the most difficult topics to discuss, because here we need to understand how someone exists in your brain, because the physical presence is gone, that body is gone. What we now have is memories. And memory is one thing that we say a lot. We say memories a lot, but very few of us really understand what memory is. And today you will need to understand what memory is, because a loved one exists only in memory. Because after loss, after someone's death or after someone's passing away, they will exist only in memory, and there are different types of memory. And this is where it gets complicated, because there are different types of memory and all of them are interconnected, and each one of them can trigger another one. So what are the three types of memory for this discussion? One is called episodic, one is called semantic, and one is called implicit. And tell me if you've heard about this. Episodic memory. Episodes, it's in the name. You remember events, you remember certain things, you remember going to a picnic, you remember them picking you up at school, or you remember one particular party you had, one conversation you had. This is episodic memory. Semantic memory is all about meaning or concepts. So semantic memory is you remember the rules that you had, you remember ideas that you shared, you remember concepts that you have, family values that you have. All of those are semantic memory. And implicit memory are the habits that you form, the rituals that you have. So for example, having chai every morning with that person, or meeting for a tennis game every week. It could be anything. These are all habits. These are conditioned reflexes. And all these three types of memories, like I said, an event can remind you of a meaning or a concept can remind you of a habit, or a habit can remind you of an event. All these different memories can trigger one another, and as long as this memory exists in one of these different types, they can trigger the others. So and the difficult part is that all these three different types of memories exist in different parts of the brain. So the episodic memory is stored in the middle part of the temporal lobe, so the medial temporal lobe. The semantic part is stored in the lateral temporal lobe, and the implicit memory is stored in basal ganglia. And if you remember a part called as cerebellum, so cerebellum is called as the little brain, and wait, let me draw it. The cerebellum is actually behind the brainstem. So this is where the cerebellum is, and this is the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia and cerebellum are always talking to each other, and this is where all your implicit memories are. So the kind of memories that you don't forget, how to cycle, how to swim, so those are your implicit memories, and those are your habits. So for example, if every day in the morning you have a habit of going and reading the paper with someone you love, and if that somebody is not there, that habit will not go. Even if your other memories now say that that person is not there, that instinctive habit of going and sitting there and looking up to see that person, that habit is stored in a different area. And so as long as those memories are there, it can trigger the other ones. And one of the main aspects of mourning is recovery from these triggers, because every time a memory is triggered and it is not dealt with in the right way, it acts as a threat, and that will make you uncomfortable. And I say uncomfortable as a euphemism, but it can give you any degree of discomfort. It can make you just want to stop talking, or it can make you go all the way into complete sadness. That is depending on where you are in your stage of recovery, but any one of these memories can trigger that. So this is why mourning is a complex process, because it is not as simple as get over it. It is not as simple as getting rid of the things they own, or it is not as simple as just telling yourself that they are no longer there. There are different parts of the brain that physically needs to form new networks, and until they form new networks, just saying those words is just one network. But until the networks in the basal ganglia rearrange themselves, until the networks in your cerebellum rearrange themselves, those memories will trigger your amygdala. It will trigger every one of your defense mechanisms. Yaya Bhutwala is here. Yaya, welcome. Right, 1 second. You're not a moderator yet. I don't know how that happened, but probably because this is the first time that you've joined my chat. But very, very nice of you to join. This is a conversation that I think we can have again, and I would love to have you on the stream as well. Because of this, because it is a complex process, and because it takes time, and because every time it is triggered there is emotion, and every time there is triggered, because there is threat, you find it aversive. You want to go away from it. You want to get away from this whole thing that is triggering all these negative emotions. It becomes easier to avoid, and constantly there is an avoidance reaction. Let me not deal with this, let me not do this right now, because why do this? It is obviously such a horrible thing to go through. Now let's talk about the traditional way in which we understood recovery from grief, which is the 5 stages of grief. So you've roughly understood, we've roughly talked about the 3 parts: bereavement, that is the loss; grief, that is what you go through; and mourning, which is the recovery. Now we are talking about how people have understood the recovery process to happen. And the 5 stages of grief, it actually came out in 1969. The name of it is Kubler-Ross grief cycle. So this is the full name, the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. There was a lady called Elizabeth Kubler. She actually made this the 5 stages, and the 5 stages were denial, anger, I'm sure you've all known about this, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And this was what the 5 stages of grief was originally understood to be. So let's cover this. Even if it is outdated, there is merit in talking about it. The first stage is when you face an information that does not fit into your reality. Like I said, initially amygdala gets triggered, and the first impulse is get this away from me, right? And so if you draw the brain and think about how these 5 stages go through, it actually forms an interesting pattern. So if there is an information and you don't want that information, it doesn't fit, first is amygdala, which is denial. It will try rejecting that information, and this conflict actually happens here in the anterior cingulate cortex. The anterior cingulate cortex will take in this information, ask your limbic system, find out that this is not matching, something is not fitting in, and your amygdala tries to say, get rid of it, leave it, don't even give me that responsibility of trying to come up with an explanation, I don't even want it, reject it outright. Suppose denial doesn't work, then you have anger, and that is also from the amygdala, but this is now aggression. So you are taking it out of your, again, it is like pushing something away, but it is aggression. You want to physically harm that person, you want to shout at that person, very much still a limbic response. Then comes bargaining, and this is where there is a slightly more cognitive involvement. because bargaining is not a limbic thing. Animals don't really bargain very well. Humans bargain very well. So as you recover from grief, there is involvement of your cognitive senses. So your PFC, your prefrontal cortex, is now thinking of a way of still avoiding. You are still trying to reject it. Okay, so this is the important part. In the first three, you are rejecting it, but you are finding out different ways of making sure that that extra piece does not fit into your jigsaw. So till here, you are trying to make sure that you don't have to get that piece into your life at all. Deny करो, फिर गुस्सा करो, फिर bargain करो कि छोड़ ना, if I do this, can I avoid this? All these things. Then finally you have to accept it. You have to accept that piece. You have to take that piece into your life. Now you are convinced that there is no way that I cannot put this into my life. And then according to this theory, you have depression because it doesn't fit. You can't throw it away. You can't keep it. So it doesn't fit. There is no place to hold this extra piece of information. And finally, you make place. You make place in your life to fit in that extra jigsaw, and that is acceptance. So in a way, it goes from limbic to cognitive to limbic to cognitive. So denial, anger, limbic, bargaining, using your cognitive skills but to deny it, then depression, you're back into limbic, and then PFC. Now we realize that it is not so straightforward. It is not so linear. It is not that you will first deny it, then get angry, then bargaining. And it was actually a very simplistic approach. And today, the current theory is that it is a non-linear one. And at every stage, the brain is trying to accept. So at whatever stage you are, you want to go into acceptance. You want to be okay. And what you actually go through is acute grief. And this is a normal one. This is the normal reaction. That is acute grief. You go through all those emotions. You go through all your physical, emotional, different stages. Not stages, different states. So the main difference is that these are different states of mind that you go through, and after acute grief you can go into acceptance, or now more and more we are using the word as complicated grief. And just to be clear, acceptance does not mean no grief. And this is the fundamental difference. Acceptance does not mean no grief, because grief is it becomes a background state. If you've lost someone you love, it doesn't mean that if 10 years later you see a photograph or somebody mentions something, you will not feel sadness. That sense of loss is always going to be there, but it is not interfering in your life. You are still functional. You are still able to do everything. And that is what acceptance actually means. But complicated grief, and I think somebody had asked me, what is the difference between acute and complicated? Acute grief is immediately after the event. And what research has found now is that most people, almost 60-70% of the people, are actually very resilient. And this is a word that I want you to think about. The word resilience, which means the ability to recover. And most people recover from acute grief. And they found that at 6 months after an event that produced significant acute grief, most people they still had sadness. They still had triggers of sadness, but they were not functionally impaired. So they were functionally okay, basically. They were able to do everything, they were able to perform everything and trigger sadness, yes, but not interfering with their life. And there is no sign of depression. Complicated grief, unfortunately, the healing does not happen. So for some reason, the healing process is interrupted, and it is interrupted by unstoppable questions. And usually the questions that have been asked is, what if something else had happened? If only this had happened, why did this happen? So at some point they are not able to come to terms with it, and so it degenerates into complicated grief. And in complicated grief, even later on, they are constantly getting attacks of sadness that makes them functionally impaired. So they're not okay anymore, they are functionally impaired, they're not able to perform their daily activities, they're not able to do their work. Now, an important aspect of recovery is that we tend to think that if there is an event here and you feel a sense of grief here, recovery happens like this. But this is not how the brain functions. Actually, what happens is there is something called as dual process model of coping. And think about think about a household where someone has died, and how that household recovers. There will be a lot of sadness, there'll be intense sadness initially, and then intermittently you will find that they forget it. They forget that this has happened. Something will happen, somebody will crack some sentence, someone will smile a little, and then they will go back. They'll go back to feeling sad. Then again something will happen, somebody might a kid might laugh somewhere and then quickly shush, and then again people will go back into sadness. And gradually that oscillation of sadness and normalcy will keep on increasing until there is more and more normalcy. And this is an oscillation type of recovery, and this is what is typically seen in grief. And the reason that this happens is because when there is moments of grief, your brain is trying to deal with the loss, and when there is moments of respite, your brain is trying to restore itself. So dealing with the loss and dealing with how to restore. So this constant to and fro is how your brain heals. Because constantly dealing with the loss, like somebody said, is too much cortisol. So there is too much stress in constantly trying to deal with that sense of loss. And as you know from the depression talk, too much cortisol or constant chronic cortisol exposure is not good. And if there has to be healing, then there has to be intermittent avoidance and intermittent facing of reality. Complicated grief happens if there is constant cortisol or constant avoidance. Both of these are not good for healing, because both of these will interfere in your brain creating new networks. One of the important things about complicated grief is that there is a constant tidal wave of emotions, and it can be both negative and positive. Negative emotions, you get envy, you get bitterness, you get anger, you get sadness, guilt. And even the positive emotions, sometimes when you feel happy, it is never pure happiness, it is always associated with guilt. And this on a long-term basis makes it a complicated thing. The last point that I want to make on this topic, on the point of recovery, is that recovery is usually never a one person activity. So you've heard of the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. uh, that is not true just for raising a child, it is equally true for um, dealing with death. Because especially in our Indian culture, I remember being in households where there has been a death, and how everybody comes to visit. And from a neuroscience perspective, that makes a lot of sense, because at that time of loss, what is actually triggering is both the sense of this person having gone away and the fear of now what. And that sense of emotional support, that sense of physical support that your community gives you, your friends give you, your family gives you, that has a big role to play in the recovery. And the role that your society plays in recovery from grief cannot be underestimated. And of course, society is changing very rapidly, but our brains are not. So our brain is still very much a tribal product, and the more limbic it gets, the more it depends on things that it is dependent on 10,000 years ago. So that is something that I want to emphasize, that if there is grief, if you have experienced grief or you are going through grief, then I hope that there is social support. And today, more than ever, there are organizations that you can reach out to. There are people that you can talk to if you feel that you are in a place where you need help. And so do not hesitate to reach out for help. And if there's any way that I can help, if there's any way that I can connect you to people, then let me know and I will. I think that that actually covers the topic. Okay, I wanted to cover it in 1 hour, and I'm glad that that has happened. I hope that I didn't trigger anybody too much. I know that this was a difficult topic to discuss, and I did try to be as scientific as possible. There is a lot to still talk about, and but I wanted to keep it in an hour, so that's what happened. All right. If there are any questions, then now is a good time to ask. Saloni, welcome. Wasim, welcome. You know who. Welcome to the chat. And also, there are a couple of announcements for today. We'll be having a neuroscience talk every Monday. We will be having a podcast on every Wednesday, unless I am going on somebody else's podcast. So that is the plan. And on Friday evenings are community nights. So either something with Discord or maybe gaming or nothing. So that is going to be the plan for 2021. We are going to discuss evolution of the brain through the year, and I'll set out the schedule for that. But we are going to talk about how the brain evolves in a fetus, in a child, in a teenager, in an adult, in an old person. So we are going to talk about the brain at different ages. So that is something I'm looking forward to doing this year. There are a couple of announcements regarding the YouTube channel. We are 300 subscribers away from 30k, so get that done. We'll have a Q&A with all of you guys when it reaches 30k. There are new memberships on. We have 3 memberships. I'm going to close the other ones. So Achal Shetty, you've just joined medical students, but just want to quickly tell you that we have 3 membership levels of Sits Place, Team and Friends, and Sits Place is the lowest one, which is for 30 rupees. Now I've started that so that everyone can join in, and we are going to be having members only chat at the end of these neuroscience streams. So from next Monday onwards, after the stream is done and we have discussed the topic in an hour 15 minutes, I will be making the chat members only, and we will be just having a discussion. Everybody else can attend it, of course, but we will be having a members only chat at the end of the discussion, and that is what the Sid's Place is for. And the Discord, our Discord server is also called Sid's Place, so please join there as well. And is the stream lagging? All right, I hope not. Wait. Sid going slow motion. Okay. Sort of lagging. Wait. I think it should be okay now. All right. I'm not sure why. Not his voice. All right. Okay. But anyway, that was the main point. One another announcement to be made was we are having chess. Tournaments every week on the Discord channel. So please join the Discord channel. We are going to have prizes for people who win the tournaments. And yes, I think that's about it. I think I'll just share the link for joining the chess tournament. So we've formed a new club on chess.com. So yeah, please join this. Please join the chess club on chess.com, and you'll be getting all the updates, and you'll know when the tournaments happen. They'll happen every week. Okay, so it's a weekly tournament. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much. I'll be announcing what the next Monday's topic is soon. And Neuroscience of Time, we are going to be doing it as a podcast. So I will be calling a neuroscientist on, and I'm just setting that up. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending. I'll see you all soon. Bye.